Thank you. We are back for continuation of docket, the hearing in docket number 2019-182E. This is the Wednesday afternoon session. I'd like to thank the parties for your indulgences while we had the commission the commission business meeting, and appreciate y'all understanding that we needed to get that done. I believe we are still with Duke Companies. Is that correct?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Let me do a roll call of the commissioners. I'm sorry, I'm about to forget that. For the record. District 1.
Commissioner Williams is present in the hearing room.
District 3.
Caston present in the hearing room.
District 4.
Present virtually.
District 5.
Thomas is present in the hearing room.
District 7. And I'm with District 2. Belser is present in the hearing room. Mr. Cooper, you want to proceed, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this time, the companies would call Lon Huber.
Let's see. Good afternoon, Mr. Huber. Please state your name for the record.
Good afternoon, Lon Huber.
And please, the court reporter will swear you in, please.
Mr. Huber, if you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Huber, by whom are you employed and what capacity?
I am the Vice President of Rate Design and Strategic Solutions for Duke Energy Corporation. I support both Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress.
Okay. And did you prepare or cause to be prepared 16 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the Commission in this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
And if I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Okay. Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Huber's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Huber's direct pre-filed testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Huber, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared one exhibit that was attached to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes to that exhibit at this time?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Huber's pre-filed exhibit be entered as the next hearing exhibit.
Mr. Huber's pre-filed direct exhibit, Exhibit 1, will be marked for identification as hearing Exhibit 11 and entered into the record of the case.
Mr. Huber, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 11 pages of rebuttal testimony that were pre-filed with the Commission in this proceeding?
Yes.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed rebuttal testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Huber's pre-filed rebuttal testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Huber's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as given orally from the stand.
Madam Chair, at this time, I'd like to review Mr. Huber's summary in a Q&A format.
Please proceed, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you. Mr. Huber, what is the purpose of your direct testimony?
Really, the purpose of my direct testimony is to provide the Commission with an analysis of the best practices from other jurisdictions related to net energy metering in order to aid the Commission in its cost-benefit analysis of the current net metering program.
At a high level, what are the requirements applicable to net energy metering under Act 62?
Initially, it's important to note that Act 62 contains new requirements in establishing the next generation of net energy metering that simply weren't required by Act 236. These requirements include a focus on eliminating unwarranted cost shifts and will certainly impact the rate-making process. It is therefore appropriate that this Commission examine and consider jurisdictions across the country have utilized tools to achieve similar goals and align rates with the cost to serve a net energy metering customer. Applying these tools, however, requires careful consideration of each utility's system and customer load profile. For example, the typical load of a residential net energy metering customer has a distinct dip during the midday and a steep up following that midday dip, whereas the average residential standard service load shape maintains a relatively steady demand profile with less variation. Additionally, although net energy metering customers may have different load profiles than non-net energy metering customers, they both consume power during peak times. Therefore, the utility must plan for the maximum demand that all customers, including net metering customers, could place on the system, and therefore, build out and plan our systems assuming net energy metering customers will be consuming power during key peak periods. An appropriate rate structure is important to ensure that net energy metering customers pay rates that accurately reflect these costs, despite their ability to decrease power consumed overall from the utility.
And does Act 62 address this aspect of net energy metering programs?
Yes, Act 62 specifically contemplates this and envisions time-varying rates as a way to align utility costs with actual costs to serve net metering customers. And time-varying rates have been utilized in other jurisdictions, including all volumetric time-of-use rates, to better align rates paid by net energy metering customers with the cost to serve these customers. These complex rates are typically coupled with other tools such as demand-based pricing, such as demand charges, minimum bills, grid access fees, and non-bypassable charges. So Hawaii and California offer time-of-use rates. They've also implemented minimum bills. Arizona and Georgia have implemented grid access fees. New York, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts have implemented non-bypassable charges for certain programs. In several states, including New Hampshire, Indiana, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, Hawaii, and Louisiana, they've all implemented alternative netting periods, such as monthly netting or 15-minute netting, and even real-time netting. Although any such practices must be examined in the context of a complete tariff, the companies believe that time-of-use rates, when coupled with mechanisms like a minimum bill or more demand and peak-focused pricing, could be appropriate in South Carolina and fulfill Act 62's mandate to align costs and benefits through the use of rate mechanisms such as time-varying pricing. So although rate mechanisms are more sophisticated than those currently utilized by the companies in existing net energy metering programs, the companies are confident that residential customers in South Carolina would be able to understand and respond to these price signals, and this is backed up by experience, including a pilot program launched by DEC in North Carolina. Taken together, it is clear that these best practices can be utilized by the companies in South Carolina to achieve the goals and the spirit of Act 62.
Thank you. And please explain the purpose of your rebuttal testimony.
Sure. The purpose of my rebuttal testimony is to describe the similarities between the testimony filed by the parties in this docket, clarify why the companies utilize the summer coincident peak or summer CP demand metric embedded cost study, clarify the benefit of using both a marginal and embedded cost analysis to determine cost shift, address the need to examine the impact of current net energy metering programs on low-income individuals, and summarize the relevant findings to be drawn from the Commission in this proceeding.
Do you believe the parties were aligned on certain issues in the direct testimony submitted in this docket?
Yes. My review of the testimony filed in this docket found many commonalities between the parties. The pre-filed testimony showed that parties found the cost shift to be common under the existing Act 236 net metering programs. Although the parties used various forms of cost-benefit analysis, they all seem to arrive at a common conclusion regarding the cost shift. Many of the parties also appear aligned on the tools that may be used in the context of the utility-specific solar choice proceedings to eliminate the cost shift associated with net energy metering. Witness Beach, ORS Witness Ori, and myself all suggested that time-variant pricing could be one mechanism to reduce the cost shift. There appears to be a common theme within the parties' testimonies that a more complex rate design is required to build upon the current net energy metering programs and meet Act 62's requirements. My rebuttal testimony explains that the companies utilize the CP demand metric because it is consistent with the company's most recent commission-approved cost of service study in the 2018 rate cases. The companies can't deviate from a commission-approved allocator until such proposed allocator is fully considered in a separate rate proceeding before the commission. My rebuttal testimony also notes that embedded and marginal cost approaches have two different purposes. The embedded cost study answers if customer generators are paying their fair share of historical costs, and the marginal cost study answers if customer generators will pay for their fair share of future costs. Both studies should be considered in this proceeding and in the solar choice tariff dockets. Additionally, my testimony notes RRS witness concerns regarding the current net energy metering program's impact on low-income customers and suggests that these concerns could be addressed in the company's energy efficiency dockets, separate targeted generic docket. However, this generic docket does not appear to be the appropriate forum for addressing these concerns. However, it is important to note that any reduction in the cost shift that results from solar choice metering tariff approved by the Commission in those upcoming dockets would positively impact low-income South Carolinians.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Huber, what are the companies requesting that this commission find or order in this docket?
Yeah, this is really important. In short, the companies respectfully request that the Commission include in an order in this docket the following. 1, the company's analysis provides a reasonable framework within which to examine the existing net energy metering programs, the subject of this generic docket, as well as the company's proposed solar choice programs, the subject of the Duke-specific solar choice docket. 2, a cost shift and subsidy arise under existing net energy metering programs. 3, more complex rate structures should be utilized to achieve the goals of Act 62 in establishing the solar choice program. 4, the next generation of net energy metering in South Carolina should incorporate mechanisms that ensure utilities can recover certain fixed costs regardless of customer usage and reflect the customer's maximum usage grid. And finally, 5, the Commission should evaluate a broad range of tools in establishing the next generation of net energy metering in South Carolina. This concludes my testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. If you would now please answer any questions of council or the commission.
Cross-examination, Dominion Energy.
No questions for this witness.
South Carolina Appellate Legal Justice Center.
We have no questions for this witness. Thank you.
Nucor Steel, South Carolina.
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Vote Solar.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. This is Thad Cully with Vote Solar. I do have a few questions for Mr. Huber. Good afternoon, Mr. Huber. How are you today?
Hey, wow. Good to hear from you.
Yes, good to see you as well. And so you've been with Duke Energy now for 1 year, approximately. Is that correct?
That's right. Recently celebrated the 1-year anniversary.
Well, congratulations. And before that, you were a consultant, and you've done extensive work on this type of issue, net metering, rate design associated with customer generation. Is that correct?
That's right. Sometimes I feel like that's all I've done in my career.
Well, would you say between yourself, Witness Beach, and Witness Barnes, we've probably had a lot of experience from dockets around the country brought to bear in this docket?
Oh boy, I'd say. And I also would note that the ORS witness, Ori, also provides some great perspective as well. But between all of us, I don't think the commission could go wrong. We have a lot of collective experience, and although we present things from maybe different angles and parties, I think for the most part we're all saying relatively consistent things, and that's because we've been through this for a long time.
So given that context and your experience, your name did come up today in some cross-examination of Ms. Ford on behalf of the companies, and I wanted to, that kind of raises the bat signal. I wanted to ask you some questions to follow up on that. So I'm going to ask you, if you have it in front of you, Ms. Ford's testimony. I think it was marked as hearing Exhibit 6, marked in her testimony as Exhibit 1. And for some further description, as you look for that, these are the presentations that were given at the first stakeholder meeting.
Great, and yeah, what page? I'm there.
If you could turn to page 52 of Ford Direct Exhibit 1, as it's pre-marked.
Okay. So that's your presentation.
Okay, are you at that page now?
Yeah. Why doesn't a cost of service tell us about NEM, or what doesn't?
Okay, page 52 should say E3 2013 NEM Evaluation COSS. Lots of acronyms.
Mr. Colley, please clarify that you're using the page number on the header and not the page number on the watermark put on the side of the page when it was filed with the commission.
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I am actually using the watermark that was pre-marked, and I'm sorry, I don't have that other pagination.
It's page 60.
Page 60. Thank you for correcting that for the record, Mr. Huber. So you're here with me now, and this page says E3 2013 NEM Evaluation. And are you familiar with E3 and their cost effectiveness work in California on the net metering program there?
Oh, very much so.
And with their first evaluation in 2010, would you agree that's substantial and comprehensive up to that point, looking at a net metering program?
I would agree. Up to that point.
And this 2013 update included something the 2010, I don't believe, did, which was looking at cost of service.
That's correct.
And
this is a very famous chart.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you there. So are you familiar generally with the chart that's included in this slide?
Yes, very much so.
Okay, could you explain to the commission what this chart depicts when we are looking at, let's just take PG&E, for example. We had Witness Everett for Dominion that was a former PG&E employee. Let's look at PG&E. It says without DG column, then a with DG. Could you explain what we're looking at here?
Yes. So E3 performed an embedded cost analysis of the existing rate design at that time, which doesn't exist anymore and was a very aggressive rate design. But regardless, the analysis says, well, how much of the embedded costs does a solar customer and a non-solar customer provide, to the utility essentially, right, in terms of their revenue requirement. And so this shows the outcome from that calculation for both residential and, of course, here, non-residential.
And so is it your recollection for this first stakeholder meeting that cost of service was discussed, at least in part, to look at some differences between residential and commercial and industrial customers?
That is correct. In fact, I do recall an exchange between you and myself at some point around this. I don't exactly recall the details, but it was certainly covered from this perspective of embedded costs and how that relates to both residential and non-residential.
And just looking at the difference there with PG&E, how without DG, the customer would be paying 128% of their cost to serve, and then with DG, they're still paying 106%. To you, does that indicate the rate design is providing sufficient revenue collection?
Yes, and I think it's important to note that this outcome that you see here, well, most of the time it's after DG, it's lower than 100%, but there's uniqueness in California that we won't get into. But for the most part, you find that the more complex rates for C&I, the more that a solar customer will be covering their embedded costs. And witness Ori did a great job in his testimony talking to that fact, that the more complex non-residential rates really, for the most part, capture it. Now, some non-residential rates that aren't as complex, they have a harder time collecting the appropriate amount of revenue from customers with DG.
Okay, so let's maybe just step back and think about this in a different way. If, as a rate design expert, if you were trying to solve the delta between 100% of collection of cost of service and 88%, you would have several tools at your disposal, would you not? If you looked at changing netting intervals or changing the underlying rate design. Those are two different things, two different tools, aren't they?
That's correct. There's a variety of different tools, yes.
And so using that variety of tools, you could have a pretty surgical precision in finding a rate design and a netting interval policy that gets to an outcome that is supported by the cost of service study.
Absolutely.
And so the same would be true if you were to look at your commercial industrial class through a cost of service and evaluation of net metering. That is you'd have plenty of tools between the netting interval and the rate design itself to make sure that a Act 62 compliant rate would come out of that.
That's correct.
Okay, well, I have no more questions. Nice talking with Mr. Huber.
Likewise.
Thank you, Mr. Cully. North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Vice Chair, no questions.
Thank you. Solar Energy Industries Association.
No questions from CA, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. Upstate Forever, CCL, and SACE.
No questions. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. Alder Energy Systems.
Do have cross, Madam Vice Chair.
Please proceed, Mr. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. Hi, my name is Taylor Spear. I represent Alder Energy Systems LLC in this proceeding, and I have a few questions for you. Can you hear me okay?
For now.
Okay. Can I turn it up?
Yep, it's good for now, yeah.
All right. As part of your testimony, you studied load profiles for NEM customers in the state of South Carolina, correct?
That's correct.
And your study excluded data points for non-residential customers, correct?
Sir, which study?
The load profiles.
Oh, that's correct.
Did you participate in the proposed settlement with some of the interveners in this case? And
Yes,
Duke
I
Energy?
did.
I have some very brief questions about that.
Madam Chair, this is Ashley Cooper. I want to go ahead and object to any questions about a settlement that is protected both as settlement discussions. Also, it is outside the scope of this docket.
Madam Vice Chair.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Spear.
Just I'd like a moment. Would you like for me to respond substantively now? I don't want to interrupt you.
No, go
You sounded
ahead.
like you were going to say something. Okay, thank you. So I'm not going to be asking about proposed settlement terms of anything that's confidential. In fact, the only thing that I know is what's been published by Duke Energy. So I certainly appreciate Mr. Cooper's objection to going into any sort of settlement terms that are confidential. We know some of them are not. I will not do that. That is not my intent. And I'm not even going to really ask about the settlement terms. I want to understand some things that have beyond that. And so the question was really foundational more than anything else. So, Mr. Cooper, I'm not going into the settlement terms, I believe at all, but certainly not beyond what's been published.
Okay. And certainly not getting into any discussions, the settlement discussions.
Yes, of course.
Correct.
No.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to overrule that objection. Please proceed.
Mr. Huber, did you model the impact of what the new solar choice tariff may look like for residential customers moving forward?
Madam Chair, this is Ashley Cooper, counsel for Duke. Again, the second part of my objection was relevance. I don't understand how that is relevant to this proceeding, which is a generic docket looking at the existing NEM program.
Your objection.
I understand.
Your objection is noted, Cooper. Yesterday, there was an exhibit that was allowed in, and following up on that, I'm going to allow this line of questioning. Thank you.
Thank you. And it will be brief, Madam Chairman. Does the court reporter need to read back the question to you, Mr. Huber?
Yes, please.
Just a second while she looks back.
I'll make it easier, and I'll strike the question and ask it again, Madam Court Reporter. That'll keep you where you need to be. Did you or Duke Energy model the expectation for what will happen to residential solar in the event that the proposed settlement terms are approved by the Commission?
Yes.
And as a result of that model, did you learn that a current average payback for a residential rooftop system would move from 11 years to 14 years?
I can't recall. I don't have any of those numbers in front of me. There's different residential rate designs. So Did you tell a journalist from the publication Utility Dive that information? I spoke to a reporter about payback periods in general, and again, I don't recall specifics.
Did you tell that journalist, quote, "The plan would increase solar owners' current average payback for their rooftop systems from 11 years to about 14 years, but with the demand response program incentives, it would likely come back in line with today's payback"?
That sounds about right, yes.
Would you dispute that that's what you said?
I'll take your word for it.
I don't have any additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spear. Office of Regulatory Staff.
Jenny Pittman for ORS. We have no questions for Mr. Huber.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for Mr. Huber?
Madam Chair Lady?
Commissioner Irvin.
Thank you. Mr. Huber, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
On page 6 and 7 of your rebuttal testimony, I believe you stated that a proposed allocator that deviates from a commission-approved allocator could not be employed until a separate rate proceeding. Is that your understanding?
That's correct.
What would prevent the parties from agreeing to a new allocation method concerning inputs in this proceeding?
Well, I guess it really gets back to how the allocator changes revenue requirements across all classes. And so it's not something you can really isolate in a particular look at a subclass. If the allocators changed, the revenue requirement for broader customer classes such as industrials would also change and have a cascading impact all the way down the line. And so you'd have to really recalculate everything to then study a subclass properly.
Were different allocation methods discussed at the stakeholder meetings?
Good question. I think methodologies were brought up in general of saying that for instance California uses X methodology and South Carolina uses Y methodology. I don't think anything was discussed about swapping in and out of anything. More to the fact when you do your embedded cost analysis, you should be looking at what those allocators are in doing that analysis.
So do we need to have a new cost of service study done before we proceed?
Well, fortunately, I don't think you do. And that's one of the benefits of how we've approached this. The embedded cost of service study does look at the currently approved allocators, which still hold for investments that have been made in the past. So I don't think you're losing much there. However, some could argue that the past isn't representative of the future. In that case, we've provided a marginal cost analysis that covers that base as well. So you're sort of completely protected between that past look of, hey, is that customer collecting the right amount of costs we've already invested, versus that future look of, will they cover those costs, other costs, new costs going forward? So we have all those bases covered, which lends itself to not having to actually engage in a large new study of any kind. And in fact, we were very intentional in our approach to this docket to make it easier on you all, because let's be honest, this stuff gets very complex. And so what we want to do is we want to use already existing commission methods and findings and leverage those so that we wouldn't actually have to undertake in-depth studies or reconfigure large analyses or even go forward with a rate case.
And for the benefit of someone that might not be familiar with the terminology, can you give us kind of a rundown of what you believe or perceive commission approved allocators at this time? Sure.
So I think, and again, this is all in an effort to make it easy and less complex of using what's currently approved. And for many of the demand expenses that we allocate out to customers, those are packed within the one summer CP, which is essentially the top hour of the year. And you're looking at how a customer's load or a customer class's load interfaces with that top hour of the year. We also have a non-coincident allocator that's on, again, the top hour of a particular class. Witness Harris has far more detail than me on all the different nuances of the allocators, but for the most part, you're looking at these top hour intervals, if you will, that contain a lot of cost.
Do these top hour intervals, is that the same thing as a peak, winter peak or summer peak?
Essentially, and so the methodology gets to, well, over what time period are you going to be measuring that peak? Is it just winter? Is it over 400 hours, or is it over 1 hour? And South Carolina uses a 1 hour metric for the summer season.
So if in a perfect world, if you were hired to help us with this, solve this challenge, how would you go about it? using those approved
The net
methods?
metering companies? Oh, yeah, that's that's a great question, and one that I've been asked many times as I've helped commissions and consumer advocates in these issues, which, as I mentioned before, are highly complex and not getting any simpler, I might add. And so my approach is really what I took here, which is how can we get 95, 98% of the way there so we don't have to boil the ocean and we can focus on all the major categories in the methodology. And in that way, the commission would be confident in finding that a comprehensive framework, such as the one Duke has proposed, is a reasonable one within which to examine the existing, Act 236, existing net metering programs, as well as the company's proposed solar choice program later on. And so, how we get there is that we really focus and leverage existing customer or existing commission methodologies and findings. So we have three primary lenses, which I would recommend to a commission, and again, what we did here. And the first one would be that embedded cost analysis using the current cost to serve methodology. So we got that one. That satisfies Act 62 with the embedded cost analysis. We also use the scheduled purchase power methodology and findings. So we take care of how you're looking at exports there. And then, as I mentioned before, for the future-looking costs, we're using the long-run marginal cost framework that has been approved and used for years in the energy efficiency and DSM frameworks. So I think with those three lenses, you're going to be in really good shape. And again, you don't have to create anything new, which is the beauty of it. There's been some commissions where I've had to literally create an entirely new framework and dive into all the nuances of a particular cost category and so forth. But here, because South Carolina has already done a good amount of work in this regard of building out those three different categories, you can leverage them and always fine-tune them going forward, right? I think my other advice would be you'll have another bite at the apple on this, and in the next proceeding, you'll be able to go into more detail as well there. And most importantly, we can continue to evaluate these methodologies and valuations in the years ahead on a regular cadence, which I believe Act 62 lays out. So again, it's a little bit daunting what you have in front of you, and that's exactly why we said, hey, let's leverage the existing methodologies and values, and then move, establish those as the methodology and move to the next step where you can continue to fine tune and tweak, but for the most part, 98% of what you need is there.
If solar storage is added to the mix, we'll have a chance to adjust for that in the future.
That's right. And in fact, the methodologies mentioned are great at assessing storage and how storage would impact the cost of the system and what benefits that storage would provide. And of course, storage is a dispatchable resource, unlike solar. So there's a lot of opportunities in my eyes for some strong benefits to the system if we can get the pricing right.
Are you finding the pricing is coming down, continues to lower price points for solar storage?
Exactly. It's continuing to decrease in price, although not as fast as I would hope on the residential side. But most importantly, I think consumers are more open to the idea of installing energy storage on their premise for backup power. And when they do that, then they already have that installed at their premise for their main use case, which is backup power. Then we can come in and say, hey, a little bit extra, would you mind if we could control your storage during those peak days when the system needs it the most? And that way we can create a win-win outcome. The customer who already installed that storage gets an economic incentive, if you will, And then all of Duke's ratepayers receive the benefits of us deploying that customer storage when the system needs it the most.
How far into the future until we see that kind of widespread across the system?
Yeah, great question. So it starts with the underlying control platform. And I believe we actually have a filing in front of you, so I won't go into too much detail, but we have a filing in front of you for a bring your own thermostat device program. That it's geared towards winter. So that will be likely using the same control platform that would link up batteries to. So once that's approved and we have some work in we have some results in the winter, then we can say, all right, well, what will it take to add batteries to that control platform? And then how can we structure the incentive in a way that creates that win-win that I mentioned before? So no subsidies, right? Has to be cost effective. And then from there, as long as it's deemed cost effective, it's all about marketing this program and informing customers about it. So I actually don't think we're that far away from at least a widespread marketing of what I would call bring your own battery program for the winter. And in fact, I think, I'm pretty hopeful that we can get something in the next 2 years and can be just like our thermostat program, where we send out marketing to hundreds of thousands of customers about that program.
Well, that's very encouraging. I'm glad to hear that it's going to be coming soon. So I appreciate your being with us today. You've been very helpful in your testimony, and I have no further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Urban. Commissioners, any further questions? Okay. Let's see. Mr. Cooper, any redirect? Mr. Cooper, are you with us? We can't hear you, sir.
The conference has been unmuted.
Hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, somehow I think I was muted and it wasn't me, because I got a message saying that someone else had unmuted me. So I hope that wasn't Madam Chair. But no, I have nothing further from Mr. Huber.
Okay. Mr. Huber, thank you for being with us and for your testimony. You may stand down.
Thank you so much.
Parties, bear with me just a second. Ladies and gentlemen, our court reporter has been going throughout all of the business meeting, and now almost an hour on here. So we're going to give her about let's come back at 3:50. That's about 12 minutes. So we got about a 12-minute break. Thank you very much. We are back in session and the continuation of the hearing in docket number 2019-182E. Let's take a roll call of commissioners, please. District 1,
Present in the hearing.
District 2,
Present in the hearing room.
District, I'm sorry,
Pardon,
that was District 3.
I'm sorry.
District 4,
Present virtually.
District 5,
Present in the hearing room.
District 7, District 2, I am present in the hearing room, and District 6 is on military leave. Thank you, parties, for your indulgences. The court reporter tells me she's good for another 4 hours now, but I told her we wouldn't go that long. And I think we are now over to, is it going to be Vote Solar or say CCL Upstate? Who's going to present the next witness?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Kate Lee with CCL and Upstate Forever, and I'll be presenting.
Thank you.
Dr. Frank Hefner.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Please proceed.
The South Carolina Coastal Conservation League Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, Upstate Forever, and Vote Solar call Dr. Frank Hefner to the stand.
Did I make it all the way?
Let's see. There you are. Please state your name.
All right. Frank Hefner.
Please wait to be sworn by the court reporter, please.
Okay. Let's see if I can adjust this a little better.
There you are.
Okay. All right.
Dr.
I don't know if that's true.
Dr. Hefner, if you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Dr. Hefner, could you please state your name again for the record?
Yeah. Frank Hefner.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I am a professor of economics and the director of Office of Economic Analysis at the College of Charleston.
Dr. Hefner, did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket on October 8th, 2020, direct testimony consisting of 8 pages and 3 exhibits labeled Exhibit A, Exhibit B, and Exhibit C?
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony at this time?
No, I do not.
And if the questions put to you in your testimony were asked of you at the hearing today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Were the exhibits to your direct testimony prepared by you or under your direction?
Yes, they were.
Madam Chair, I would move to have Dr. Hefner's pre-filed direct testimony entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Dr. Hefner's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
And Madam Chair, I would also move to have the 3 exhibits attached to Dr. Hefner's pre-filed direct testimony, exhibits A, B, and C, entered into the record and identified as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Dr. Hefner's pre-filed direct exhibits A through C will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit 12 and entered into the evidence of this case.
Dr. Hefner, did you prepare a summary of your direct testimony today?
Yes, I did.
Would you please read your summary to the commission?
Yes, thank you. Madam Vice Chairman and Commissioners, thank you for having me here. My name is Dr. Frank Hefner. I'm the Director of the Office of Economic Analysis and a Professor of Economics at the College of Charleston, where the focus of my research is in the field of what is called regional economics, and particularly the use of economic impact models and the evaluation of economic policies to state and local economies. I have conducted impact analyses on such diverse industries as the recycling industry in South Carolina, medical facilities such as MUSC, industrial facilities such as what was at the time the proposed Volvo plant in Berkeley County, and events such as PGA golf tournaments. As I understand it, the Energy Act directs the Commission in evaluating the costs and benefits of the net energy metering program to consider the direct and indirect economic impacts of the net energy metering program to the state of South Carolina. The purpose of my testimony is to explain and quantify the economic impact of the solar industry on South Carolina. Excuse me. Economic impact typically includes direct, indirect, and induced impacts. Direct impacts are the purchase of local services, labor, and goods, such as wages paid to the installers of solar panels. Indirect impacts, often called the ripple effect, are the purchases of goods and services by the firms in South Carolina that install solar panels. And lastly, induced impacts are the impact of purchases as a result of wages paid. For example, it is important to consider the purchases made possible by wages paid to solar workers, such as the groceries purchased by the solar panel installer. The total economic impact of an activity, or in this case, the solar industry, a collection of activities, is the sum of all three of these impacts. My testimony contains my analysis of, first, the economic impact of the solar industry in South Carolina as a whole, and second, economic impact broken down market sector with a focus on the economic impacts of rooftop solar. My analysis of the solar industry generally is in Exhibit A to my direct testimony, and Exhibit B contains my analysis broken down by market segment. To calculate economic impact, I used direct impact values, namely job numbers, as inputs into a regional economic impact model called Impact Analysis for Planning or PLAN. I gathered solar job numbers from the Solar Foundation's National Solar Job Census for 2018 and 2019. IMPLAN is a well-recognized model that is used by many researchers, including federal, state, and local governments, universities, and private companies. For example, Duke Energy itself used the IMPLAN model to calculate the benefit of its grid improvement plan for North and South Carolina. Various statistical techniques, IMPLAN localizes the impacts of spending to a study area, here the state of South Carolina. This means the impacts are completely within the state. IMPLAN also accounts for leakages, meaning spending that leaves the state or region in the process and thus does not exert an impact. For calendar years 2018 and 2019 respectively, using IMPLAN, I calculated the total economic impact of the solar industry in South Carolina at $1,169,009,854 and $1,538,920,852. For the residential market segment in particular, the 2018 total economic impact was $685,801,528 and $863,334,598 in 2019. In 2018, the solar industry supported 6,330 jobs, and in 2019, 7,250 jobs. The residential solar industry supported 3,551 jobs in 2018 and 4,067 jobs in 2019. By way of comparison, the direct impact of the solar industry, which is widespread across the entire state, is approximately equal to the combined direct impacts of the GE power turbine plant in Greenville and the Nucor steel plant in Berkeley County. My analysis shows that the solar industry and the solar residential segment in particular have a significant positive impact on the state's economy, which may be considered in policy decisions especially decisions that could potentially reduce those impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hefner. Madam Chair, the witness is now available for cross-examination and questions from the commission.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Let's see. We'll start with interveners, South Carolina Appleseed Legal Justice Center.
We have no questions. Thank you.
Nucor Steel, South Carolina.
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association.
No questions, Madam Vice Chair.
Solar Energy Industries Association.
No questions, Madam Vice Chair.
Alder Energy Systems.
No questions, Vice Chair. Thank you.
Dominion Energy, South Carolina.
Madam Chair, I have some brief questions.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Dr. Hefner. My name is Matthew Gissendanner. I'm Corporate Counsel for Dominion Energy, South Carolina. It's nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Am I still there?
Yes, yes. Okay. Dr. Hefner, I want to make sure I understood you correctly. The results of your study are estimates. What you attempted to do was to estimate impacts from 2018 and 2019, impacts of the solar industry in South Carolina from 2018 and from 2019. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so, in other words, you attempted to estimate impacts that have already happened. Is that right?
That is correct.
And your study does not attempt to project anything about future impacts, correct?
No, it does not.
Okay. Dr. Hefner, I want to look at Exhibit B to your direct testimony. And
yes,
or do you have it in front of you?
I do.
And in Exhibit B, you provide employment numbers for 2018, correct?
Correct.
And those numbers, I believe I understood you to just say, are based upon a national survey conducted by the Solar Foundation. Is that correct?
That is correct. All of my data that went into the entire study, the input data came from survey data from that foundation, correct?
Okay. And so you simply rely on their methodology to allocate jobs across the sectors. Is that right?
That is correct.
And you didn't do anything to ensure that jobs were not double counted across any of these sectors. Is that right?
No, I did not. I did not conduct a survey. And if by double counting, I want to make sure we're on the same page on that, because one previous witness mentioned double counting between North and South Carolina, which is, I don't think that's the question you're asking me right now, is it?
I was referring to double counting the same job function in a variety of sectors. So residential versus non-residential, manufacturing versus O&M.
So I guess no, I did not do that, but if I understand your question correctly, you're asking whether the same person could have worked in two different sectors and be counted as two jobs.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I would have to go back to the documentation the Solar Foundation had on how they did their surveys to see how they ensured that. That's always a difficult thing to do.
But as we sit here today, you did not do anything personally to ensure that they were not double counted across sectors.
Correct, I did not.
And as we sit here today, you are not aware of whether Solar Foundation employed any means to guard against double counting the same job function in a variety of sectors.
No, I'm not aware of what they did, yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Hefner, I believe one of the
one of the documents you indicated you relied on was the Solar Foundation's National Solar Job Census for 2018. Is that correct?
Correct.
And on page, bear with me one second. On page 28 of that document, where we're talking about the installation sector, am I correct that it reads, the installation sector, which represents the end of the solar value chain, makes up 64% of all solar jobs? Do you agree with that? That's page 28.
Where we might have a difference on page numbers again between what was filed and what I have in front of me. So that's the distribution of I see that. Oh, is this still part of Exhibit B?
I was looking at the document that was provided to the company in discovery, which is the actual Solar Foundation National Job Census of 2018.
So you're referring to the Solar Foundation's report, right?
Yes.
Okay.
On page
28.
Yes. Yes, on page 28, I believe
Correct.
it reads the installation sector, which represents the end of the solar value chain, makes up 64% of all solar jobs.
Correct. That's what it says. Mm-hmm.
And then it goes on later to say that the census, that is the National Solar Job Census, only counts those who spend at least 50% of their time performing the installation work, but also those who spend at least 50% of their time as project support staff, including permitting, engineering, design, sales, marketing, administration, accounting, and management staff. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what it says. Correct.
And then if we could skip forward to page 38 in the manufacturing section. One second. And am I correct that on page 38, as it regards the manufacturing section, that the solar job census indicates that manufacturing activities often occur at facilities that build some solar components, but where most employees do not spend 50% of their time on solar-related work. Employees must meet this 50% threshold to be counted as a solar job in the census.
Yes, that's what
Is
it
that
says.
correct?
That's
Okay.
correct. That's what it says.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Mr. Hefner, on Exhibit B, you list 3,551 residential jobs in 2018. Is that correct?
Correct. 3,551, correct.
And so, and do you have any way of knowing, for example, whether 1,000 of those jobs only spent 50% of their time on solar-related activities?
No, but also I need to point out that this employment is not 3,051 jobs. Let's see, I got to check before I say that, let me check one thing. These are the results of economic impact. So that's 3,551 jobs that are direct, indirect, and induced attributable to the residential activities, solar.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. With the jobs that you input, I understand that you input jobs into the in-plan model to calculate your wages and economic impacts. Do you number of jobs that you input into the model, do you have any way of knowing, for example, whether the jobs only spent 50% of their time on solar-related activity?
No, I take that from the Solar Foundation survey where they said that's how they accounted for it.
And so do you know if the Solar Foundation, if someone only spent 50% of the time on solar-related activity, did they count that as a full job in the employment data? A full-time job?
No, I do not know how they did that. Correct.
Okay. Dr. Hefner, do you know or can you identify any other jurisdictions that you're aware of that quantify the value of induced economic benefits, both direct and indirect, when setting rates for net energy metering programs?
What I looked at that I think I'm familiar with a little bit is whether implan was used as an exhibit or explanation. Whether it was used to set rates or not, I do not know.
Okay. Thank you. Is it true, as I believe I understood Ms. Lee to indicate to another witness today, that your study does not account for the opportunity cost associated with an investment in solar?
Correct. Opportunity cost is not mentioned in this study at all.
Okay, so that means. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, it's not mentioned in other studies also. So, studies of, for example, the economic impact of Duke, they didn't talk about opportunity cost either. It's just, or the economic impact of Volvo. Opportunity cost is not a term that's brought into these kinds of studies typically.
Okay, and so, but that means that your study does not account for whether the money used to install solar could have been utilized to provide a greater economic benefit in South Carolina in some other way. Is that right?
Exactly. I did not account for that, and I'm not too sure anyone would know how to either.
And it also has to be true that your study does not account for the loss of jobs that would occur as a result of pursuing solar at the expense of other technologies. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Did your study account for the payment of incentives when calculating your economic impact of solar energy in South Carolina?
No, incentives were not addressed at all.
Okay. Did your study account for the rate impacts and corresponding economic impacts to non-solar customers as a result of the adoption of solar in South Carolina?
No, it does not. It's simply, here's the activity, and here's what the impact is in the state analysis.
So if due to the increased adoption of solar, rates on non-solar customers increase, this would not have been accounted for in your study. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And finally, Dr. Hefner, am I correct that the estimate of jobs is a fundamental building block of the implan model?
Well, that's one way to approach it, which is the way I did it, because I did not have other data. You could also use, when you're talking about a factory, for example, total value of output would be a measure that could be used in it. But I use jobs, which is also a measure I've used in many other impacts, where that's what we had available to us from the nature of the industry, so to speak.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hefner.
Mm-hmm.
No further questions.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Gissendanner. Duke Energy Companies?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Duke Energy has no questions for Dr. Hefner.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Office of Regulatory Staff?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Jenny Pittman for ORS. I've got just a few questions for Dr. Hefner.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Hefner. Can you hear me all right?
Loud and clear.
Perfect. All right. Your estimates of economic benefit include estimates for solar manufacturing, don't they?
Correct.
Have you looked at how much manufacturing of rooftop systems and installation methods is actually done in South Carolina for use in South Carolina residential installations?
No, I did not.
Are you aware of how much manufacturing is done here?
I did not.
Like, any idea?
No, I have no idea.
Okay.
I may have in tangentially looking at things, but it's difficult to find even looking at public data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the answer is no, I do not know.
Gotcha. So if nationally there's more manufacturing and you use national ratios, wouldn't that overestimate the manufacturing in South Carolina for residential solar, which would overestimate the purported economic benefit of residential solar?
I can't say whether it would overestimate or underestimate it. That's an unknown without going into an exact survey. For example, if someone did a different survey example, we may be able to come up with those kind of numbers. I followed the same methodology a study done by VCU in Virginia did also, which used the same type data I did, the same proportions, but applied to Virginia, of course.
Okay. You based your report on an in-plan input-output model, correct?
Correct.
And that just means you input the amount of South Carolina-specific spending on solar manufacturing and installations and solar jobs, and the in-plan program spits out economic impact figures for a point in time?
I specifically used jobs as my input measure into the categories, and then in-plan will calculate the economic impact with the state, yes, in terms of indirect jobs and induced jobs and labor income also.
Gotcha. So this kind of analysis, is it often used to justify economic development investments, including tax incentives, training incentives, infrastructure incentives?
It has been, yes.
So if we spend X amount of dollars, we'll get Y number of jobs and Z number of dollars?
Pretty much every major economic development event in South Carolina, BMW, Volvo, Boeing, they've all had economic impact studies done to indicate what that effect would be. So yes, it is used widely, and in some cases it's used in specifically not necessarily in-plan, but the multiplier concept that you get out of in-plan also is used also in public policy in South Carolina, yes.
Okay. And here in this docket, you discuss several economic development incentives to encourage rooftop solar adoption, like net metering, state tax incentives, and the federal investment tax credit. Is that correct?
Well, wait a minute. When you say the document, you're talking about the entire study that Dr. Burnett and I prepared, correct?
Correct.
I'm only testifying on the part I did, which is the economic impact analysis, not any of the material that Dr. Burnett did.
Okay, so your testimony doesn't support or doesn't discuss net metering, tax incentives. Correct.
And he has some statements in there, kind of overall direction of the industry and things like that also, which that was his part of that analysis.
Y'all co-authored this analysis, didn't you?
Indeed, we did.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Hefner. I have nothing further.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pittman. Commissioners, any questions for Dr. Hefner? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Lee, any redirect?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. Dr. Hefner, do you recall Union Counsel, Mr. Gissendaner, asking questions about the inclusion or non-inclusion of opportunity costs in the study?
I'm sorry, you just broke up at the end there. Can you please repeat?
I can. Do you recall Dominion Counsel asking you about whether your study included opportunity costs?
Yes, I do.
Dr. Hefner, could you talk a little bit about what the challenge is in including these types of opportunity costs in a case such as this one?
Yes, and I hope I don't put on my professor hat and start lecturing, so I apologize if I do. The problem with measuring opportunity cost is a very important concept in economics in order to just make the economic decisions. And as a concept, it's very, the difficulty, of course, is in measuring it and figuring out what that means. So, for example, I've used this in some of my classes. What is the opportunity cost of building the Cooper River Bridge? Well, the opportunity cost, for example, would be all the money that could have been used on school buses, for example. But we don't know that that's where it would have gone. And we don't know if it would have gone in some other area. So you could basically say the cost of the bridge has an opportunity cost, and you can measure it possibly in that case dollars, because dollars in the construction activity spent by a public entity, but you don't know, without knowing where it would go, you couldn't definitively answer what that cost would be. So in most of these kinds of studies, we do not address opportunity cost issues because, one, it's just not industry standard in this kind of analysis. You'll see economic impact studies using IMPLAN widely, and the term opportunity cost is just not addressed. Conceptually and practically, if I were asked to do one in another project, the answer would be it'd be very difficult for me to do unless I had the list of alternatives for that spending, which I don't have. If you give me an alternative, then yes, we could start talking about that. But in the absence of that, no, it would be very difficult to do.
Thank you. So where, as you just testified, the costs are difficult to quantify, are they typically included in economic impact studies?
No, not that I have seen in years.
Where the costs are certain, would you be able to do an in-plan analysis of the cost?
Well, well, first of all, if you look at what I did, I don't have dollar figures, I have jobs. And so you'd have to somehow then come up with, well, what was spent in developing these jobs and what kind of spending? So, I'd have to have many more specifics on that. I mean, if I could look at my neighbor's house and say, you put a solar panel on it, what could you have done with that money otherwise? And I could ask that question and then figure out what that impact would have been. But in the absence of those kind of answers, I would not be able to calculate the opportunity cost of him putting up the solar panel as an economic impact analysis. He can do it as a personal finance analysis. I can't do it as an economic impact analysis.
And Dr. Hefner, have you ever prepared economic impact studies for government agencies to evaluate policy decisions?
I'd have to think back if they were used for policy decisions. Have I ever been commissioned by agencies? The answer is yes. What they did with them, I really actually don't know how it ended up in the policy issues. It generally became information in the policy debate. So no, I don't have any direct evidence in that. I do know cases where multiplier analysis analysis, which is fundamentally what an input-output model gives you. One job here creates two jobs total type analysis is used in public policy. It's used in the state of South Carolina for tax incentives.
Great. And so your analysis did not include opportunity costs. Did your study include possible benefits from net metering policies, from the net metering program?
No, and given the way I approached it, that would not have been possible because I was looking at jobs. So to keep picking on my poor neighbor as an example, it's a fictitious neighbor, by the way. So I can't tell if he has a savings in electricity bills that he is now using to spend somewhere else. If he is, that's a personal finance for that person. If he's saving funds, money from electrical bills by the use of power, by purchasing, using solar power, that money is spent somewhere else and has an impact, and I can't measure it because I just don't know where it is. So there are potentially positive benefits that are out there that, one, I didn't capture myself, and I certainly didn't capture the supposed negative benefits either. Costs, sorry.
So is it possible that the economic impact numbers that you calculated could be even higher, given that not all possible benefits were included?
Yes, it would be possible, but it'd be very hard to measure.
Counsel for Dominion also asked you about the Solar Foundation data on which you relied. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Why did you use the Solar Foundation National Job Census reports as the source for the solar jobs numbers that you used in your analysis?
Number of reasons. Solar industry, unlike some studies that I've done, say for like Volvo, where you have a specific plant and you see people walking in and out, and you can count the number of jobs that go through the gate. Something when you talk about an industry like solar industry, tourism industry, recycling industry, and I've worked in all three of those areas. You have to have some way of figuring out what jobs are attributable to that industry. What's a ports job? Truckers that drive up and down the highway. And so all of these kinds of diffuse things need some kind of way of getting a handle on who's working there, and they usually rely on surveys. And so the survey instrument goes out to a firm and says, how many workers do you have in the firm? How many do you attribute to solar energy? And they mail that back. And so that's a way of getting into the information. We do not have such a survey at the state level across the states that I could find. We do not have one in South Carolina. So they have a methodology of identifying firms that are involved in the solar industry, and then they mail out the survey, and then they reconcile the numbers, and then they publish them. So that's why I use it.
Thank you. I got a message saying that my microphone may be too loud. Is this better? I can get further away from me.
No, you're fine now. For me,
okay. Thank you. So, Dr. Hefner, is it typical for you to rely on studies that are conducted by the industry that you are evaluating?
Well, when you do an economic impact on any industry in South Carolina, you rely on them to provide you a business, the information that you need to do this. In some cases, for example, the tourism industry, we rely on a survey done by a company that has that information. So Parks, Recreation, Tourism uses it also. So yes, a lot of people use other parties' surveys and data collection methods in order to do their analysis.
Thank you. Just a couple more questions, Dr. Hefner. ORS Council asked you about your use of national proportions that were then attributed at the state level. Could you please talk a little bit about whether or why you believe that approach is reasonable?
Well, it's done by other researchers, and the study that I referred to earlier was by Virginia Commonwealth University. I can't remember the exact name of their Institute for Public Policy, but they conducted an analysis, and they used the survey data from the Solar Foundation and those proportions and applied it to the state of Virginia exactly the same way I did. Because in the absence of a direct survey of the state, of all the people involved in solar power, solar energy, then you really don't have many other options. So it's a procedure that is used by academicians and I'm sure by consultants also.
Thank you. And so is it also true if the residential to utility sectors, the proportion between those was different in South Carolina versus nationally, and particularly the residential was higher, would your study undercount the economic impact of residential solar?
Oh, yeah, certainly. I mean, it could either undercount or overcount depending on how what the actual numbers are, since we didn't do a direct survey. And even a direct survey has a possibility of undercounting or overcounting, because a survey is a survey. I mean, we get the unemployment rate in South Carolina by surveying, and so and how many people are working. Those are all survey instruments that are used to generate data. So yes, if the numbers that I used, the proportions, indeed the impact could be larger if those proportions were different.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Hefner. That's all of my redirect questions.
Limited recross, Dominion,
No recross.
Duke, South Carolina Appleseed, Nucor,
No questions, Madam Chair.
Alder Energy,
No questions, thank you.
ORS,
Jenny Pittman for ORS. We have no recross for Dr. Hefner.
Commissioners, Commissioner
Madam Chair.
Caston,
Dr. Hefner, did you do any independent research or look at any other avenues or numbers to verify the numbers you use, say from Solar Foundation or any other group?
No, I did not.
Okay, thank you.
any other commissioners? Okay. Dr. Hefner, thank you for being here today. Thank you for your testimony. You are excused.
Thank you.
Parties, it's not 5 o'clock yet, and I would propose we move forward. If there's any objection, please say so very quickly. I think the next witness is one from Vote Solar. Is that going to be Mr. Cully?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Vice Chair, and I'm optimistic we can move this pretty quickly. Short testimony, very short summary. So at this time, Vote Solar calls witness Odette Muka to the stand.
Mr. Cully, you take what time you need. We're here to hear the parties.
Absolutely, thank you.
Ms. Muka, please state your name for the record for me.
My name is Odette Muka.
And the court reporter will swear you in.
Ms. Muka, am I on? If you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much.
And good afternoon, almost evening, Ms. Muka. Could you please, good afternoon, could you please state your name, employer, and job title?
My name is Odette Muka. My employer is Boat Solar, and my job title is Regulatory Director for the Southeast.
Thank you. And on October 29th, 2020, did you call to be pre-filed in this docket testimony, responsive testimony, consisting of 5 pages and 1 exhibit, that exhibit numbered OM-1?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed responsive testimony at this time?
No, I don't.
Now, if the questions put to you in your testimony were asked at the hearing today, would you have the same answers?
Yes, I would.
And were the exhibits to your testimony prepared by you or under your direction?
Yes, they were.
Madam Vice Chair, I would move to have Witness Muka's pre-filed rebuttal responsive testimony entered in the record as though given orally from the
Ms. Muka's pre-filed responsive testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally. Thank you.
Thank you. I would also move to have the 1 exhibit attached to Ms. Muka's pre-filed responsive testimony be entered in the record and identified as the next hearing exhibit.
Ms. Muka's pre-filed exhibit attached to her responsive testimony consisting of 3 pages will be marked for identification during exhibit number 13 and admitted into the evidence of this case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Muka, did you prepare a very brief summary of your very brief responsive testimony?
Yes, I did.
Would you please read that?
Of course. Thank you, Mr. Culley. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and all the members of the Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. My response testimony focuses on the direct testimony of Office of Regulatory Staff Witness John Roof. Witness Roof raises concerns around energy burden in South Carolina, and he discusses net metering conceptually through an equity lens. However, Witness Roof does not provide any quantitative analysis or supporting evidence to demonstrate whether net metering has a negative or positive impact on other customers. I agree energy burden and equitable energy policy are certainly very important topics. In fact, they are key focus areas of my organization's work. However, they are out of the scope of the current discussion of net metering cost-benefit methodologies. I recommend that the Commission defer general discussions of energy burden and equitable solar energy policy to upcoming dockets around the utility-specific solar choice tariff. This concludes the summary of my pre-filed responsive testimony.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Muka. Madam Vice Chair, Ms. Muka is available for cross-examination and for any Commission questions.
Thank you, Mr. Culley. South Carolina Appleseed Legal Justice Center. Cross.
Madam Vice Chairman, I do have a couple of questions, and I'll be very brief in the spirit of consistency.
Please go ahead, Mr. Prothero.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Muka. Can you hear me okay?
Good afternoon. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I hope you're doing well.
Thank you.
Just a couple of very brief questions. Are you familiar with any programs that have been set up specifically by the solar industry to make solar more accessible to low-income consumers?
I would say that, yes, the concern around access and equity is certainly important to the solar industry. And so there's been a lot of thought put into how the industry can expand access to the customers that may have been left out in the past.
Okay, but maybe let me refocus my question a little bit. Are you aware of any specific types of programs, either low-cost financing is just the first thing that comes to mind, programs that are put in place by the industry itself to expand access to lower income consumers?
Yes, I think so. If you look at the business models that have been used over the years, changing from asking homeowners to provide upfront costs to put solar on their roof, that model has evolved to other options for customers. So solar leases comes to mind as an option where customers are able to pay that upfront cost. Another model is community solar that we've discussed briefly so far.
Okay. And with solar leasing, to your understanding, are those costs, however, still recouped over the life of the lease?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. As far as you know, have any participants in the industry made any new commitments to either create or expand programs to expand access to lower families as a part of this proceeding or the Solar Choice Tariff proceedings?
I believe that there were discussions around bringing in low-income topics in the Solar Choice Tariff, which I believe will be in the next sort of round of discussions of the next docket.
Okay. Are you referring to the settlement with the Duke companies?
Yes, I will state that I was not involved in those discussions, so I'm not intimately familiar, but I believe there was discussions within that context, yes.
Okay. Thank you. That answers my questions, and I don't have any others. Thanks for your answers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prothero. Nucor Steel, South Carolina, any cross?
No cross, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Carolina Sustainable Energy Association?
No cross, Madam Vice Chair.
Solar Energy Industries Association?
No cross, Madam Vice Chair.
Upstate Forever, SACE and CCL?
No cross, Madam Chair.
Alder Energy Systems?
No cross, Madam Vice Chairman.
Dominion Energy?
No cross.
Duke Energy Carolina and Duke Energy Progress?
No cross.
Office of Regulatory Staff?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Jenny Pittman for ORS. I have just a couple of questions for Ms. Muka.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Good evening, Ms. Muka. Can you hear me okay?
Good evening, Ms. Pittman. Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Who does Vote Solar represent?
Solar represents all sorts of folks. So we advocate for sound policy that's in the public interest, and I would suggest that we try to take into account what equity whenever we can.
So, do y'all mostly represent solar companies?
No, we're not an industry association, no.
Do you represent individual homeowners with rooftop solar, other agencies or organizations, companies?
Yeah, we're, our expertise is in policy, and we try to advocate for, like I said, sound policy that, protects the planet, of course, but also is in the public interest.
Okay. Are utility companies the only parties who can help ease the burden on low-income customers when it comes to solar affordability?
Are utility companies the only industry that can reduce or increase the affordability of the solar industry? No, I think there are a lot of parties that could participate in that endeavor.
So solar companies can play a part and help solar become more affordable for the low-income members of our community?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was mentioning before, I think that's it's a central concern for many solar companies.
And you've acknowledged that the energy burden of low-income Carolinians is an important issue. What has Vote Solar done to address this issue?
Yes, I did state that, energy burden and equitable energy policy is a central concern of Vote Solar's. And so I'll just give one example. We recently proposed a new concept to the South Carolina Commission in a previous docket around the COVID pandemic. That proposes a way of addressing energy debt through clean energy technologies, and we coined that term CRED, or Clean Relief for Energy Debt. So that's just one example.
And that's targeted at helping the low-income residents?
Yeah, absolutely. Low-income residents as a group, but more broadly, anyone that is suffering from energy debt, either now or in the future.
Any specific programs specifically just targeted at the low-income residents, low-income consumers?
Yes, broadly speaking, Vote Solar is very involved in low-income specific topics. We operate in several states around the country, and so it's of particular concern when issues come up in commissions. So just as an example, in Florida, we were involved in a couple dockets around community solar and tried to ensure that the programs included low-income provisions.
What about in South Carolina?
I'll just state that I'm relatively new to Vote Solar, so my colleagues I know have been involved with many cases over the years. But certainly, if we were to be involved in anything that, for example, was addressing fair and equitable rates, we would certainly be taking into account the concerns of customers that have the least ability to pay.
Okay. I think that answers all my questions. Thank you for your time. Nothing further.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pittman. Commissioners, any questions?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Keston.
Excuse me. I'm getting there. Is it pronounced Mocha?
Muka.
Muka. Pardon me, I'm sorry, Ms. Mocha. Ms. Mocha.
No problem.
Looking at the testimony, and I don't want to read all the areas, but I think on page 3 you talk about witness Ruoff describes there a tragic link between high energy burden and evictions. These are important issues, but they do not relate specifically to the methodology for calculating the value of energy produced by customer generators. Go on to say, discuss net metering conceptually through an equity lens. He does not provide any quantitative analysis. I guess my question is, as I look at this, think about it, why is energy burden or equitable energy policy not relevant to the process of developing a cost-benefit methodology?
Well, my understanding was Docket was focused pretty narrowly on measuring cost and benefit of and how one does that through which methodologies. And part of the reason, one thought is that energy burden is quite a large and complex topic. Forgive me if you can't, if I need to speak up. And so what the Commission might benefit, for example, from a more in-depth discussion around energy burden, not within simply the narrow confines of this docket, which is limited to cost and benefit methodologies around net metering, but something that's much broader in scope one that could potentially bring in many voices and a wide variety of stakeholders that are, intimately familiar with the details and are directly impacted by the topic of energy burden.
So, in developing and evaluating the methodology based on Act 62 and considering these things, again, relation or anything related to equitable energy is not relevant?
Well, from my perspective, as our previous witness, Tom Beach, testified, net metering results in net benefits. And so, in that sense, there's kind of a spillover benefit when people go solar. And so in that sense, it's not necessarily related to energy burden. In fact, it's sort of the reverse. If more customers were able to actually install solar either on their roof or if they were engaged in a community solar, for example, program, then that would reduce their monthly energy burden.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioners? Mr. Cully, any redirect?
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I would like to have just a few questions.
Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Muka, in response to your conversation there with Commissioner Casson, I would say when we talk about energy burden, and you did mention the CRED program, would you agree, are there multiple ways to address energy burden?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Cully. There are many ways to address energy burden, and I've put in a lot into how one could reduce energy burden of households in across the country, and it's I was trying to say earlier, it's quite a complex topic. So there's several ways of getting at it, and I believe I listed a few in my testimony. So whether it's having, for example, a more efficient household is certainly one way of addressing it. Another is having lower rates. For example, discounted rate for lowest income groups of people, or really investing in weatherization, or even through more efficient housing as you build a housing stock. So I think there's a plethora of ways to address energy burden.
And in terms of your response that maybe some additional process and a more in-depth and broader comprehensive look about how to get at energy burden, could you describe a little bit more about why is that process part of this important? Why is who is at the table important?
Yes, absolutely. I think having a very inclusive stakeholder process only increases the richness of the discussion and ensures that any decisions that are made have included the people that are most impacted, and also include address the unique challenges that people in South Carolina face. So as part of a comprehensive approach to addressing energy burden, I would suggest bringing many voices to the table, not simply those of us that are here today who are interested in net metering, but a much broader group of people who understand poverty in the state, understand the challenges people are facing, and can bring, knowledge of the specific and unique challenges that are, and, propose more comprehensive but also unique solutions that fit South Carolina.
Thank you. And I want to turn to just one more question. In your conversation with Ms. Pittman, let's say, I think she asked you if utilities were the only parties that could have programs to reduce energy burden. Could you speak a little bit about, and you have some experience with federal policy with the Department of Energy, are there things that the federal programs the federal government offers specifically for clean energy that can be utilized to address low-income communities and reduce energy burden?
Yes, I used to work for the U.S. Department of Energy, and through that work I became familiar with several programs that are, the funding is available to the states. So one is the Weatherization Assistance Program, and that funds, that is targeted for improving the weatherization and the energy efficiency of low-income. Sorry, someone trying to interject?
I don't know who that was, but please continue, Ms. Muka.
Okay, sorry. So the Weatherization Assistance Program is one, and then the other is the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, and that is another program that is funded out of the federal government that helps to relieve the energy burden of low-income homes. So that's funding that's paid directly to offset the cost of the energy bills.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Muka. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cully. Recross.
No recross from Appleseed. Thank you.
Okay, Appleseed, Nucor,
No cross. Thank you.
North Carolina Sustainable Energy,
No recross. Thank you.
Solar Energy Industries,
No recross. Thank you.
Upstate Forever, say CCL,
No recross, thank you.
Alder Energy Systems,
No questions. Thank you.
Dominion Energy,
No recross.
Duke Energy Carolinas, Duke Energy Progress,
No recross, thank you.
ORS,
Jenny Pittman for ORS. We have no recross.
Commissioners. Ms. Muka, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for being here. You may step down.
Thank you very much.
Well, we are right at 5 o'clock. Anybody want to keep going? No, I'm just teasing. I got some looks. We'll start in the morning at 9 o'clock, and I think first up, I believe, is going to be Mr. Spear and Alder Energy Systems by ORS.
Thank you.
So, thank you all very much. I appreciate your considerations today on our scheduling, and we will see y'all in the morning at 9. We are in recess until then. Thank you.